The movie kicks off and we see this guy in a wheelchair. But hold that thought, because bam, we flash back to 1963. It's Cambridge, England, and there are these two dudes, right? And they're in this totally intense bike race through the old-timey streets. One of them is this kind of nerdy guy with glasses, and that's our main dude, Stephen Hawking. Anyway, they end up at this party, and in walks this girl, Jane. Stephen sees her, and he's immediately hooked. So he goes right up to her and is like, "Hello." She's like, "So who are you?" And he goes, "I'm a cosmologist." And she's totally confused. Like, what's that? So he gets all clever and is like, it's basically a religion for smart atheists. She plays along and asks what they worship, and he says, a single equation that explains literally everything in the universe. You know, no biggie. She thinks that's pretty cool and is like, well, nice to meet you. Hope you find your equation, and then she leaves. So then we see him in class. The professor is super serious, telling them this is for their PhD, and it's a huge deal. He hands out this crazy hard assignment. Later, his friend comes to his room and is like, dude, how many did you solve? But get this, Stephen hasn't even looked at the questions yet. His friend is freaking out, like, don't you even want to get your PhD from Cambridge? And Stephen's just super chill, like, yeah, of course. So the friend leaves, and Stephen finally gets up, puts on some music, and starts working. But then, total disaster, he knocks over his drink and ruins some of his papers. Next day in class, he's late, of course. The professor's checking everyone's work, and when he gets to Stephen, Stephen just hands him these messy, stained cards because his paper got wrecked. He's all apologetic, like, sorry, I only did 9 of them. And his friend's jaw just drops. He's like, 9? Like, that's an insane number to solve. The professor looks at them and is just blown away. He's like, bravo, man! The professor is so impressed he pulls Stephen into this famous lab. Get this, it's where they discovered the electron and split the atom. A huge deal. And he's like, I'm taking my best students to London to see this famous mathematician, and you should totally come. Then, Stephen's just hanging out outside a church, and who walks out? Jane! Surprise! He gets all smooth and invites her to lunch with his family. So she goes, and his whole family's there. His dad's asking her questions like what she's studying, and she says she's into arts. But then Stephen and Jane start talking, and he's going on and on about stars and how they're born and die and all this cool science stuff about UV light, and instead of being bored, she's super into it. You can totally tell they're clicking.
So they're watching these amazing fireworks, right? And Stephen is just like, whoa! But Jane gets all deep and is like, you know, before all this, there was just like heaven and darkness. Anyway, next morning, Stephen's heading for a train with some other guys, and he totally stumbles on the stairs. He catches himself, so it's no biggie, but it's weird. Then he's in this lecture by that famous math guy, and you can just see the gears turning in his head. He's totally zoned in. Later, he's just staring into a cup of coffee, and get this, he has a major breakthrough. He's like, what if you apply black hole theory to the whole universe? Like, if everything is expanding, what happens if you run time backward? The whole universe would just shrink down into one tiny, super dense point. So he immediately tells Jane all about it. He's like, if you reverse time, everything shrinks down to a single moment. But what happened to time itself right then? Next thing you know, he's at a blackboard with his professor, scribbling away like a madman. He tells him his huge idea. The universe started with a big bang, exploding out of a single point, a singularity. He's so pumped, he walks outside, feeling like he's on top of the world, and then bam! He falls. Hard. And this time, he can't get up. This is where it gets really messed up. He's at the doctor's, and the doctor tells him he has motor neuron disease. The doctor explains that it's this awful thing that attacks all the nerve cells that control his muscles. So walking, talking, swallowing, even breathing, it's all going to start failing. And then, the worst part, the doctor tells him he's only got 2 years to live. 2 years! Stephen is just speechless. He's terrified. He asked the doctor about his brain, and the doctor's like, oh, your brain will be completely fine. Your thoughts won't change at all. And the doctor just apologizes and leaves him alone. It's a total disaster. So Stephen just completely shuts down. He won't see his friends. He won't see Jane. He just hides in his room. But Jane isn't having any of it. She finally forces her way in and is basically like, I don't care about any of that. I love you and I want to be with you. End of story. And it works. Stephen starts coming back. He shows up to class, now using a cane, and just smiles and says one word. Time! Jane meets with the doctor, who tells her again how bad it is, but she's just like, we'll fight this together. So even knowing he's supposed to be dying soon, she marries him. They get married. As time goes on, the disease gets worse. His walking gets harder, his speech starts to get slurry. He needs 2 canes to get around, but he does not stop working. He keeps going to the university every day because he's got this huge mission. His professor is still his biggest fan, telling everyone how brilliant he is. So Stephen finally presents his whole theory on black holes to a room full of professors. They are completely blown away. They're like, "This is extraordinary." And they ask him what the next step is. And Stephen, struggling to speak, tells them. He's like, the next step is to prove it, to find one single elegant equation that proves time had a beginning and explains everything.
So things get worse for Stephen, and pretty soon Jane has to get him a wheelchair. He tries to play it cool, telling her it's just temporary, and she's right there with him. Like, of course it is. She's taking care of him and their kids, basically doing everything. So one day she's getting him dressed, and then she's helping their kid, and the kid's sweater is stuck over his head, and Stephen's just sitting there in his chair, and through a tiny hole in the kid's sweater, he sees the fireplace. And bam, total light bulb moment. He gets this huge idea. Next morning, Jane wheels him into this big lecture hall at the university, and he tells all these super smart professors his new idea. Black holes aren't actually black. He's like, they actually glow with heat radiation, and eventually they just evaporate and disappear. The whole room is stunned. Then this one old-school professor stands up and is like, "That's complete nonsense." And a bunch of other professors just get up and walk out. They think he's lost his mind. But then another professor stands up and he's like, "Listen, I came here expecting to hear some crazy stuff. But what he just said, it's right." And the whole room just erupts with applause. It's awesome. So he gets super famous for this theory. They even name it Hawking radiation, and he gets a book published. But it's really, really tough on Jane. She's got the kids, she's got Stephen, she's completely burned out. Even Stephen's dad pulls her aside and is like, "Jane, you've been amazing, but you need help. You have to get a caretaker." Then Stephen gets invited to this big fancy opera in Bordeaux, France. He's there, being honored, feeling great, and then suddenly he starts coughing up blood. It's horrible. They rush him to the hospital, and he's totally unconscious. The doctors tell Jane the only way to save him is to do this surgery on his throat. But get this, if they do it, he will never be able to speak again, ever. And Jane has to make the call. She's just like, do it. He has to live. So they do the surgery, and just like that, his voice is gone. Jane hires this nurse, Elaine, to help out. At first, it's so frustrating. Elaine has to hold up this spelling board, and Stephen has to blink his eyes to pick out letters one by one, just to say anything. But Elaine totally gets him. She tells Jane, "He's brilliant. You're a lucky woman." Then he gets this new, super high-tech wheelchair. It's got a screen that scans letters, and he can pick them with just a tiny twitch of his cheek. And the best part? It has a computer voice that will speak whatever he types. His communication problem is solved. The first thing he does with his new voice, he tells Jane, "I'm going to write a book about time." And he just gets to work, clicking away, asking all these huge questions like, what is time? Can it go backward? Will it end? And that book becomes A Brief History of Time. He's so happy, still cracking jokes and smiling, even though his body has failed him. He says he's been searching for a model of the universe's whole life, and he finally found it. So the book is a massive hit. He's at the peak of his fame, giving this huge lecture surrounded by reporters. And he gives this amazing speech with his computer voice. He's like, there shouldn't be any boundaries to what humans can do. No matter how bad life seems, there's always something you can do to succeed. While there's life, there's hope. And the whole place just erupts with applause. And the final scene shows him in the garden with Jane and his kids, and Jane just looks at him and says, "Congratulations. It's this beautiful, perfect day." Then we get this little update at the end, like, the book sold 10 million copies, and even at 72 years old, he has no plans to retire. He's still searching for that one single theory of everything.